Hi, it's Mr. Klokovich, and I want to talk to you about something that I get really excited about, and that is garbage. I really do get excited talking about garbage, because in nature there is no garbage. Everything it's used, and so we have to try to create systems that are like that because that's more sustainable. So open up your notebook, and you're going to get to your notebook either in the asynchronous work, on the agenda, or you can go right to the module, find where it says notebook, resources and waste, get that open so we're ready to go. The next thing I want you to do is, it would be most useful, hey, look at that, it's me. Most useful if you can kind of separate your screen into two windows so that you can see this video, where that is. That's my Google Meet. But put the Edpuzzle there, and then have your notebook over here, because then you can write and look at the same time. Otherwise you can go back and forth from tab to tab because that will stop the video. You should go ahead and look. If you're having a hard time getting this formatted right, you can use this slider at the bottom to look at the part of the page you want to look at. Okay, so I think you could probably guess what that is. That's a brand new landfill that's getting started. And you can see a lot of that structure in there. You can see those pipes. Do you guys remember what those pipes are collecting? That's right, it's collecting leachate. And that's after the water settles into that landfill. And you don't want to fill it up with water, so those pipes collect the old water. And it's lined with that plastic to keep leachate from going into the soil. And then garbage is added to it, and then every day they add a little dirt on top to keep the garbage from flying away in the wind, and they smash it down, keep the air out, and just keep on. It's like a big garbage can. That's all it is. And when they're done, that used to be a hole in the ground, but you can see that now that's actually a hill. That's full of garbage and then soil and debris and things like that. And you can see at the very top, they're not using this as a landfill at all anymore. It's been totally capped. But at the top, they have a compost facility. And we're going to talk about compost in this video. This is the top of our landfill that we just read about in Chapel Hill. That landfill is actually not used anymore. It's full. They expanded it and they filled the expansion. Now the garbage goes there, gets put in trucks, and gets shipped someplace else. Probably into another poor community, and that's unfortunate. This landfill is done, though, and that's the cap. Now, they never made a park out of this, but you can see they could make a park out of that. It's kind of a steep hill, but that's the cap that they put on top of our landfill, and you can see that over on Eubanks Road. So what's in a landfill? I want you to add some of these ideas down as we talk about them, but I want you to guess, of all the different kinds of things in a landfill, think about what they're made out of. What kind of substance do you think is the biggest component of garbage that we put in the landfill? Well, that is paper. We put more paper than anything else in the landfill. What about the next biggest? Do you have an idea? That's yard trimmings. So that's what you put in, that comes to the landfill. Now, that's not going to end up going to the landfill, but that's what gets brought to the landfill, yard trimmings. And then the last of the big categories is food waste. So a lot of food gets taken to the landfill. What about the next one? It's actually four big ones, plastic. So what you should remember, though, is paper is the biggest one, and then yard trimmings, food waste, and plastic. Those are the biggest parts of our trash. And then the other ones here, metals, glass, wood waste, and then others would be rubber, leather, and textiles. But that's an average for the whole country. Another way of looking at garbage, you could look at it in many different ways. I think this is interesting to see that more than 25% of our garbage is containers and packaging. Containers and packaging. And another 26% is food and yard waste. Right? And then there's other durable goods and non-durable goods. Durable goods are things that last a long time, and non-durable goods are things that don't last very long. And very long is defined as 3 years. So that's a lot of garbage. We know that there are consequences with having landfills. There's people who have to live next to them. They take up space. How can we reduce the waste that goes into landfills? What's one idea you have where we can reduce the waste that goes into landfills? Well, I hope you were thinking about the 3 R's, because since you were a little kid, you probably have been hearing about the 3 R's. And those 3 R's are reduce, reuse, and recycle. And we're going to add to that list. But those are the 3 big ones, and they're in that order for a reason. It's best to reduce before you reuse, before you recycle. So what is reduce? Reduce means just use less stuff. Give me an example of using less stuff. What does that mean? So using less stuff might be, well, I'm just not going to buy those disposable cups. Or I'm going to just use my old radio for longer and not buy a new one. I'm just using less stuff, right? Reusing means to use things more than once. Can you give me an example of something you would use more than once? Well, I could take a yogurt container, instead of throwing it out, I could put nails in it, I could put rubber bands in it, I could use it for a planter, I could use it more than once. Or perhaps I could buy used stuff, go to the used clothing store and buy a used pair of jeans. That's an example of using something more than once. What about recycling? I know you know how to recycle. What's something that you recycle? So you probably said cans, but there are other things we can recycle. We can recycle paper, but we need to understand what recycling actually means. We're going to define it in a very specific way. Recycling means that we start with, well, this isn't the recycling part, but this is, we get metal from the ground, we have to extract it from the ground, we melt it, make these ingots, until we make a can. So here we are in the can. When we recycle a can, we make it into a new can. All right, so when you recycle something, you make it into the same thing over again, because then you don't need to ever go into the ground and get more aluminum, right? So we call that closed loop recycling, right? Because in 60 days here, you can go from a can back to another can again. You don't need the raw materials. So you make the same product over and over again. You can make a can out of a can out of a can 1,000,000 times. Because aluminum is an element, and you can't change elements, not very easily. You don't have to just do cans. If you made aluminum windows, you could do the same thing with windows. You could build a house with windows. When the house was torn down, you could take the old windows and melt them down, and guess what? Make new windows. That's recycling. There's another kind of recycling, though. Plastic bottles. Now, I know people think, well, we got to recycle the plastic bottles. And plastic bottles do go through what we call recycling, but it's not this closed loop recycling. In other words, you can't make a plastic bottle out of a plastic bottle, which means you need the raw materials to make new plastic bottles, even if you recycle all the old plastic bottles. So what this is, actually, is, after we get the petrochemical feedstock, that's just a fancy word for oil, we need oil, we make bottles, and then we take those bottles and we can shred them, and we can make them into something else. We can make them into a kind of lumber. We can make them into insulation for a jacket. But they can't be made back into bottles again. So we still need more oil for bottles. And then at best, when we're done with that new product, we have to throw it away. So is recycling plastic good? It's better than throwing it out, but really it's using it only once more. So we call that open loop recycling, because it's not a loop at all. Eventually, that's going to go into the garbage. So let's add that. We're going to add another recycle to our diagram. We're going to call that open loop. And open loop recycling is you can't make the same product, right? When you cycle bottles, you don't make new bottles, right? You can use the material for something else. Use it once more. And that's good. But it's not great. It's not like real recycling. You still need oil for new bottles. So the last one that I get really excited about talking about, and it's the one that we're doing a lot more these days, is this. Does anyone have any idea what that is? What might that C represent? Well, if you said compost, you're right. That is compost. It's a soil amendment. It's a part of really good, healthy soils. It makes soils really dark and rich and healthy, and we need lots of compost. And so compost is something we can make out of a part of our trash. What can we make into compost? What can we compost? Well, it turns out we can compost anything that's made out of natural things. So in the top half there, we have all these foods. Any kind of food is natural. You eat it, so can bacteria. But also anything that's made out of things like wood or paper, all of those are compostable, which means that bacteria and little bugs are actually going to eat them. Termites eat wood, bacteria eat things. They even make things that look like plastic compostable because they're not made out of plastic, they're made out of plants. So how do we compost? Well, we collect all that stuff and they put it in these big piles. They have these crazy machines that constantly turn the piles over and over again, getting a lot of oxygen in there because the oxygen is going to help these organisms actually eat that material. And after a while, that material doesn't look like plates and paper and food. It looks like that. There's no soil in there at all. That's all just old stuff. That's industrial composting. But many people compost at their house. I've got a compost pile in my yard. I put leaves, I put food in there, I put my chicken poop in there, and after a while it's a beautiful soil amendment. That doesn't have to take, no one has got to put it in a truck and then I don't have to buy it. I make it myself. That's at home composting. I also at school, we're not there, but at school I have a vermiculture. Vermiculture are worms. So worms will eat your food scraps. Can't eat everything, so that's a little more particular, and you can make this beautiful compost out of worms. And here's another one, and you can make your own worm bin too out of old plastic tubs. Now this is a picture I took when I was in Ecuador with a group of students. That one on the left is my son. They are actually taking out the feces out of our composting toilet. This was up in the rainforest in Ecuador, and there was no running water, no electricity. And so the toilet was a composting toilet. All the human waste went down to this bottom part. But after a year or so, it wasn't human waste anymore. It was compost. The bugs ate it, and it didn't even look like or smell like human waste anymore. And so my students, eventually, they got their hands in there like this. It's just compost. And we spread it around the papaya trees that we were planting. That's it right there. That's human waste. Not human waste anymore. It's just compost. In fact, there's no pathogens in there or anything. Very, very good stuff. So let's add compost to our list. So what can be composted? Anything natural, right? Anything natural. All of that is going to get broken down into something like that, right? So anything natural can be eaten by bacteria or small animals, and they break it down into something that then those plants can use again, and that makes a cycle. So let's take a look at our diagram here again, and I want you to think how much of that is actually natural and compostable. Look at which parts of those are natural and compostable. That's a lot of stuff that's natural and compostable. Most of our garbage can be composted. That's why I get excited about it. What's not natural and compostable would be the metals and the glass. Nothing's going to eat that, but you can recycle those. So what's the only thing that if we're going to try to get rid of all of our garbage, what's the one thing that would be a problem? That's right, plastic. What are we going to do with the plastic? How can we get rid of that part of our garbage? Any ideas? So let's take a look at this again. These are the things that we can do to get rid of most of our trash. And in class, we're going to learn how to get rid of that last bit.